Genesis 1. One has a word that shouldn't be there. The Hebrew word for God in the first sentence of the Bible is Elohim, and Elohim is plural. The suffix means more than one, the way adding an S does in English. But the verb attached to it, the verb for created, is singular. He created, not they created. In Hebrew grammar, this is impossible. A plural noun never takes a singular verb. There are no exceptions. And yet, there it sits, on page 1, word 2. The scribes who wrote it counted every single letter of the Torah. They destroyed entire scrolls over one wrong letter. But this one they never corrected. Tonight, we follow that impossible word like a detective follows a fingerprint. Because it doesn't lead to a mistake, it leads to the Trinity, hidden in the grammar from verse 1. Let me show you what this means, because the case for the Trinity doesn't start with church councils or theology textbooks. It starts here, with one word on page 1 that ancient Hebrew scribes refused to fix. And it builds from there across 1,500 years of writing by dozens of authors who didn't know each other, into the most carefully constructed argument in the history of religion. Walk into any church today and someone will tell you the Trinity is just something you accept. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. 3 in 1. The pastor says it. You nod. You move on. It's one of those doctrines that feels more like a password than an explanation. But the source texts don't look like a password at all. They look like a case being built, carefully, slowly, across centuries. And that case starts with the word we just looked at, Elohim, Strong's number H430. Used 2,570 times in the Hebrew Bible, the most common name for God in the entire Old Testament, and every single time it describes the God of Israel. The same God who parts the Red Sea, gives the 10 Commandments, speaks through the prophets. It uses that same impossible construction. Plural noun, singular verb, 2,570 times. The writers had every opportunity to use a singular word. They knew singular words. They used them constantly. El, singular. Eloah, singular, used 57 times in Job. But when they wanted to describe the God who creates, who speaks, who acts in history, they kept choosing Elohim, the plural, over 2,000 times. And before you say, well, maybe they just made a mistake, I want you to think about who wrote this. These are the Masoretes, the scribes who counted every single letter of the Torah to make sure nothing was ever added or removed. These are people who, if a single letter was wrong, would destroy the entire scroll and start over. They did not make grammatical mistakes, and they did not correct this one. Scholars have a term for this kind of construction. They call it a plural of majesty, or the royal we. Some argue that when an ancient king said, "We have decided," he didn't mean multiple people. He meant the full weight of the crown. So Elohim might simply be the divine equivalent of speaking with absolute majesty and authority. That's one explanation. But here's the problem with that explanation. Verse 2. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. 2 verses in, we have God. And now we have the Spirit of God introduced as if it's a distinct presence, hovering, moving, present in a way that's different from the Creator in verse 1. And then, if you skip forward just 31 verses to Genesis 1:26, God doesn't say, "Let me make man in my image." He says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Us, our. We are 2 verses into the Bible, and we already have 3 things: a plural noun for God used with a singular verb, a distinct spirit hovering over creation, And then God speaking in the first person plural. This is not an accident. And if it is, it's the most consequential accident in the history of human literature. Now, stop here for a second, because I want you to ask yourself something personal. Have you ever felt like you were getting conflicting signals about who God is? Like in one passage, he's this terrifying force of judgment, and in another, he's sitting with Abraham eating bread and asking for the news. Have you ever felt like the Bible describes a being so multidimensional that one category couldn't possibly contain him? What if the answer to that feeling is already in the grammar? What if the confusion you feel about the nature of God is precisely what the text is designed to sit with? We're just getting started. Here is a fact that will change how you read the Old Testament once you know it. The word Elohim appears 2,570 times in the Hebrew Bible. 2,570 times. It is the most common name for God in the entire Old Testament, and nearly every single time it refers to the God of Israel, the same God who parts the Red Sea, gives the Ten Commandments, speaks through the prophets. It uses that same plural noun, singular verb construction. The writers of the Old Testament had every opportunity to use a singular word. They knew singular words. They used them constantly. El, singular, Eloah, singular, used 57 times in Job. But when they wanted to describe the God who creates, who speaks, who acts in history, they kept choosing Elohim, the plural, over 2,000 times. Now, why does this matter for you? Because we're not doing this for theology homework. We're doing this because most people who struggle with faith, who feel distant from God, who feel like the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament seem like different people, that feeling has a direct connection to this word. If you think of God as a single, flat, one-dimensional being, then yes, the Bible seems incoherent. The God who says, "Vengeance is mine," seems incompatible with the God who says, "Love your enemies." But what if God was never meant to be understood as a simple singular to begin with? Let's go deeper into Elohim, because the root of this word is fascinating. El, the singular root, comes from a word that means power, specifically the power to accomplish what you intend, not brute force, purposeful, intelligent power. The same root shows up in the Hebrew word for arm. The arm as the symbol of strength directed toward a goal. So Elohim, at its etymological core, means something like the fullness of purposeful power. And the plural form suggests not that there are many gods. The Old Testament is ferociously monotheistic. This is not polytheism, but that the one God contains within himself a fullness that exceeds singular categories. Think about white light. White light isn't one color. It contains all colors, but it presents itself as unified, as white, as one. A prism doesn't create the colors inside it. It reveals what was always there. The word Elohim is the first prism the Bible holds up to God, and what you see, if you look closely, is not a simple singularity. You see depth, multiplicity within unity, a being who is genuinely, substantively one, but whose oneness is richer than anything we have a category for. Now, the plural of majesty argument. I want to come back to it because it's the most common objection, and it's worth taking seriously. Scholars who hold this view point to other ancient Near Eastern texts where kings use plural language about themselves. They point to the Hebrew word Adonai, my lords, which is used for the God of Israel and also uses the plural form. Their argument: this is just the ancient way of expressing the ultimate authority of a single being. The grammar doesn't imply multiple persons, it implies supreme power. Here is why that argument runs into trouble. If Elohim were simply a plural of majesty, then the ancient Israelites would have used it only for God. But they didn't. Elohim is used in the Old Testament to describe the false gods of other nations. It's used in Exodus 12:12, when God says he will execute judgment against all the Elohim of Egypt. Those aren't majestic singular beings. Those are actual pantheons, multiple deities, and the same word describes them. So the word Elohim has genuine plurality baked into it. The question is, what kind of plurality? And the answer, built across the entire arc of the Bible, is one God who is genuinely three persons, not three gods, not one God playing three roles, three distinct relational persons sharing one divine nature. That's the Trinity, and we haven't left the first 2 chapters of Genesis yet. Here's where I want to pause and ask you something. Think about the relationships in your life that are most real to you, the ones that actually changed who you are. Did any of them involve someone who was entirely self-contained? Someone who needed nothing from anyone? There's a reason a God who is pure solitary singularity has never resonated emotionally with people who actually feel things. A God who is relationless by nature cannot be the source of love by nature. You can be powerful in isolation. You cannot be loving in isolation. Love requires another. If the Trinity is true, if God is Father, Son, and Spirit, in an eternal relationship of love, then love isn't something God decided to do. Love is what God is made of. Before creation, before time, before anything that needed to be loved existed. That changes everything about how you read every passage where God says he loves you. Let's keep going. Let's talk about the plural pronouns, because this is where the case gets almost uncomfortably specific. Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Us, our, not me, not my, us, our. Now, the most common interpretation you'll hear from Jewish scholars who reject the Trinity, and this is a completely legitimate challenge, not a straw man, is that God is speaking to the angels, the heavenly court. Let us, me and the angelic host, make mankind together. That's a real interpretive tradition. It has ancient roots, but it has a problem. 2 problems, actually. First, nowhere in the Bible are angels involved in the act of creation. Not once. They worship, they serve, they deliver messages. But creating, making something from nothing, is reserved exclusively for God. If God said, "Let us create," and was including the angels in that act, it contradicts the entire theological framework of the Old Testament, which is fiercely protective of God's sole authority as creator. Isaiah 44:24 is direct. "I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens." Alone, not with the angels. Second problem, mankind is made in the image of God, not in the image of God and the angels. The image is Elohim's image. So whoever the us refers to, it's the same being whose image becomes humanity's defining characteristic. The us in Genesis 1:26 is not God conferring with a committee. It's a window into the inner nature of God himself, a being who, even in solitary eternal existence before creation, contains within himself a relationship, a conversation, a we. But Genesis 1:26 isn't the only place. Follow this thread. Genesis 3:22. After the fall in the garden, after Adam and Eve eat the fruit, God says, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." One of us. Again. Genesis 11:7. the Tower of Babel. God looks at what humanity is building and says, "Come, let us go down," and they confuse their language. Let us go down. Together. Isaiah 6. One of the most famous prophetic visions in the Old Testament. Isaiah sees the Lord seated on a throne, high and lifted up. Seraphim are crying, "Holy, holy, holy." The room is full of smoke. It is terrifying. And then God speaks. "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Who will go for us?" Isaiah is receiving a divine commission from a single figure on a throne, who speaks about himself as an us. Now, here is where it connects to the New Testament in a way that should stop you cold. John 12:41. The Apostle John, referring back to Isaiah's vision from Isaiah 6, says this, "Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him, his glory." And in context, John has just finished quoting from Isaiah 6:10. The him refers to Jesus. John is saying that when Isaiah saw the Lord on the throne in Isaiah 6, the glory he saw was the glory of Christ. Go back to Isaiah 6. The figure on the throne who says, "Who will go for us?" John tells us that figure is Jesus, in a pre-incarnate form, present in the Old Testament, participating in the divine conversation. This is not a New Testament doctrine being imported backward. It's a New Testament writer revealing the identity of someone who was already there. The US that God uses in Genesis 1:26, in Genesis 3:22, in Genesis 11:7, in Isaiah 6:8, that us has names. And this matters for you right now, because here's what happens to a lot of people at some point in their spiritual lives. They feel like God is far away, distant, silent, and they feel completely alone in that. Like they're the only one who's ever felt like they were talking to a ceiling. But think about what the grammar is telling you. Before you existed, before the universe existed, there was already a relationship. There was already love flowing between Father, Son, and Spirit, an eternal communion that needed nothing from outside itself and yet created anyway. You were not created by a lonely God trying to fill a void. You were created by a God who was already overflowing. That's not a small distinction. That's the difference between being made because God needed something and being made because God had something to give. But before we go to the New Testament, I need to show you something. Because right now, if you've studied any of this before, there's a verse sitting in the back of your mind that feels like it should stop this entire argument cold. Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema, the most sacred declaration in all of Judaism, recited twice a day for 3,000 years. The prayer Jesus himself called the greatest commandment. In Hebrew it reads, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. One. Echad, singular, a direct, explicit statement of divine unity. How does that square with everything we've been building? If you've ever argued about the Trinity with someone who knows their Bible, this is the verse they'll reach for. And they're not wrong to reach for it. The Shema is real, it's central, and it deserves a serious answer. Not a dodge, not a dismissal, a serious answer from the text itself. So here is the serious answer. The Hebrew word translated one in Deuteronomy 6:4 is echad, and in Hebrew, echad is not the only word for one. There's another word, yachid, and the difference between them matters enormously. Yachid means absolute singularity, isolated, solitary, unique to the point of having no parts, no subcomponents, no internal differentiation whatsoever. It is the word you would use for a point on a line, for a single grain of sand, for something that is one in the simplest, most irreducible sense. Echad means unified, one in the sense of a composite becoming singular. It is the word you use for things that are genuinely one, but whose oneness contains within it a complexity, a union, a coming together. Here is how echad is used elsewhere in the Old Testament. Genesis 2:24. God creates Eve. Adam sees her, and the text says, "A man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." One flesh. Echad. Two people, genuinely one, in a union whose oneness doesn't erase the two-ness, but transcends it. Numbers 13. Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan. They come back carrying a single cluster of grapes so large it takes 2 men to carry it on a pole, and the text calls it one cluster. Echad, one cluster, many grapes. Real unity containing real plurality. The writers of Deuteronomy 6:4 knew both words. They chose echad deliberately. If they had wanted to say God is an absolute, irreducible singularity, with no internal differentiation whatsoever, the word was available. It's yachid. They didn't use it. They used the word for unity that contains complexity. Now, this doesn't prove the Trinity by itself. Echad is not a Trinitarian password any more than Elohim is, but here is what it does. It closes the objection. The Shema does not contradict the Trinity. The Shema says God is one. The Trinity says exactly the same thing. 3 persons, one God. The unity is real. The complexity within that unity is also real. Echad holds both. And here's something that most people who quote the Shema against the Trinity never mention. The sentence structure of Deuteronomy 6:4 is unusual, even in Hebrew. Scholars have noted for centuries that the phrase, "The Lord our God, the Lord is one," uses a grammatical repetition that's hard to fully capture in English translation. The Lord appears twice. Our God appears once. The medieval Jewish commentator Rashi, one of the most respected biblical interpreters in history, noted that the Shema is actually a declaration about the future unity of God's names across all the nations, that what is now complex and distributed will be drawn into one. He was not thinking about the Trinity, but he was reading the Shema as pointing toward a unity that is not yet fully visible, not yet fully arrived. The Shema is not a closed door. It's a direction of travel. God is one. That is not in dispute. The question the rest of the Bible spends 1,500 years answering is, what kind of one? And the answer it keeps coming back to, in the grammar of Genesis and the plural pronouns of Isaiah and the simultaneous presences at the Jordan, is that God's oneness is the richest, most relational, most self-sufficient oneness that exists. Not simple, not flat, not solitary. One. The way a fire is, one even when it gives off both light and heat. One the way a song is one even when it contains melody and harmony and rhythm. One the way love is one even when it always flows between a lover and a beloved. Echad. We'll come back to that. But first, let's go to the New Testament, because it's there that the Trinity stops being implied and starts being stated. Matthew 3. The baptism of Jesus. This is one of the most documented scenes in the Gospels. Multiple accounts, multiple witnesses, and it is, in my view, the most theologically loaded 30 seconds in all of human history. Jesus comes to John the Baptist to be baptized. John is reluctant. He says Jesus should be baptizing him, not the other way around. Jesus insists, and John baptizes him in the Jordan. And then this happens. Matthew 3:16 to 17. And when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, and coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Three simultaneous distinct presences, at the same moment, in the same physical location, interacting with each other. This is not a metaphor. This is not allegorical poetry. This is a scene with eyewitnesses. John the Baptist sees the dove. He hears the voice. Jesus comes up from the water. All three are simultaneously present and distinguishable. If the Trinity was simply one God playing three roles, like an actor changing masks, this scene is theologically impossible. You cannot hear your own voice come from a different location while you're also descending on yourself as a bird, while also standing in a river. These are three distinct persons, simultaneously real. Now let's go to the Greek. The word translated spirit in Matthew 3:16 is the Greek word pneuma, and this is important. Pneuma means breath, wind, the animating invisible force that makes something alive. When you read that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters in Genesis 1:2, the Greek translation of that passage, the Septuagint, used by first-century Jews, uses the same root. Pneuma. The breath of God is present at creation and present at the baptism. But here's what gets more specific. Jesus doesn't just reference the Spirit in passing. In John 14, the night before his crucifixion, he gives his disciples a long farewell discourse, and he makes a specific promise. John 14:16 to 17. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth. Another helper. The Greek word is alon, another of the same kind, not different, the same. Jesus is saying, I am a paraclete, a helper, an advocate, and the Father will send you another just like me. This is not a philosophical abstraction. Jesus is drawing a relational map. He, the Son, is one paraclete, the Spirit, another paraclete, and the Father is the one doing the sending. Three distinct roles, one unified mission. And the mission is toward you. That's the part that keeps getting lost in doctrine discussions. Let's keep pulling this thread, because there's a passage in Paul's letters that ties it all together in a way that is almost shockingly direct for how rarely it gets discussed in this context. 2 Corinthians 13:14, the very last line of the letter, Paul's final benediction. He writes, The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Three gifts, from three persons, to the same people, at the same time. Grace from the Son, love from the Father, fellowship, koinonia in Greek, meaning deep participatory communion, from the Spirit. This is a Trinitarian benediction. It's structured, it's deliberate. And Paul writes it as the most natural closing to a letter about how a church should live together. The Trinity is not, in Paul's mind, a complex doctrine requiring a master class. It's the blessing you give to a struggling community. It's the frame through which every ordinary moment of Christian life is understood. Now, let's go to the most direct statement of Trinitarian unity in the entire New Testament. John 10:30. Jesus says 5 words, I and the Father are one. The Greek word for one here is heis, and it's in the neuter form, not masculine. This is critical. If Jesus were saying, I and the Father are the same person, If this were the kind of one that meant numerical singularity, two words for the same individual, the Greek would use masculine language. One being, one person. But neuter suggests something different. One in essence, one in nature, one in substance. United, but not identical. The people listening understood immediately. They picked up stones to kill him, because under Jewish law, claiming equality with God was blasphemy. They didn't think he was confused about his own identity. They thought he was making the highest possible claim about it. He was. We've followed the evidence. We've read the Hebrew. We've read the Greek. We've watched the case build from Genesis 1 to the Jordan River to Paul's final words. So now I want to talk about what it means, not as a doctrine, not as a test question. What does it actually mean that God is Trinity? What changes? Because here's what I've noticed. Here's what I've noticed. People who intellectually accept the Trinity still functionally live with a much flatter version of God. They pray to one of the three without much thought about the others. They emphasize one person's characteristics and quietly minimize the rest. And then they wonder why their spiritual life feels incomplete, like they're only getting part of the picture. Let me give you three things the Trinity actually changes, and I want you to think about your own life while I say them. The first one is about love. 1 John 4:8. John writes something that is, in 4 words, one of the most radical theological claims ever made. God is love. Not God loves, not God decided to be loving. God is love. Love is not an attribute God possesses alongside other attributes, the way you might say a person is both kind and intelligent. Love is what God is at the ontological level. His being is constituted by it. But love, real love, not sentiment, not preference, but the kind that pours itself out for another, requires an object. You cannot love in isolation. A lone God, a God who is absolutely singular and has no internal differentiation, cannot be loved by nature. At most, he can be a God who decided to love once he created something to love. Love as a policy, not a nature. The Trinity solves this. If God is eternally Father, Son, and Spirit, 3 persons in eternal relationship, then love is not a policy God implemented at creation. Love is the interior life of God before creation. The Father loves the Son from before all worlds. The Son loves the Father. The Spirit is, in some of the Church's oldest language, the love itself that flows between them. And when God creates you, he creates you out of that overflow, not because he needed a project, not because eternity was boring, but because love, when it is truly love, reaches out. It cannot be contained. What does that mean for you right now? It means you were not created to fill a gap in God. You were created because God was already so full that something of that fullness wanted to be shared. Your existence is not a necessity to God. It is a gift from God. And if you're someone who grew up feeling like a burden, like your existence was always slightly inconvenient to the people around you, I want you to sit with that for a second. You weren't created because God needed you. You were created because God's love was overflowing. The universe is what love looks like when it has infinite power. The second thing the Trinity changes is about prayer. For a lot of people, prayer feels like sending a request upward to a distant authority and hoping for the best, like filing a petition. God is up there. You are down here. You explain your situation and wait. But look at what Paul says in Romans 8:26-27. The Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought. but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. The Spirit is inside you, praying on your behalf, in a language too deep for human words, to a Father who fully understands what the Spirit is saying. And that's not all. Look at what Hebrews 7:25 says about the Son. Jesus always lives to make intercession for those who draw near to God through him. Always. Present tense. Continuous tense. He is not retired from intercession. He is right now, in your worst moment, in your most ordinary Tuesday afternoon, interceding for you. So when you pray, when you say the words out loud, or just feel the desperation without words, here is what is actually happening. The Spirit takes your fumbling request and translates it into perfect intercession. The Son presents that intercession to the Father from a position of having already paid for your access to that conversation. And the Father, who searches hearts, receives it. You are not alone in your prayer. You have an advocate inside the room. The Trinity is not a complication of prayer. The Trinity is the reason prayer makes sense at all. The third thing the Trinity changes is about loneliness. Genesis 2:18. Right after creating Adam, before the fall, before anything goes wrong, God says, "It is not good for man to be alone." This is the first not good in the Bible, not evil, not catastrophic, just not good. Aloneness is not the design. But why? If God made us in his image, and God is a solitary singular being who needs nothing and no one, then loneliness would just be part of the deal. A being made in the image of a solitary God should be comfortable with solitude. But if God is Trinity, if God is by nature relational, if the interior life of God is a communion of persons, then a human being made in that image is fundamentally wired for relationship. Loneliness is not a character flaw. It is an echo of your origins. It is you missing the thing you were designed to have. And here is the most startling implication. John 17. The night before the crucifixion, Jesus is praying for his disciples and for everyone who will ever believe because of them. And what does he pray for them? John 17:21. That they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be in us. In us. Jesus is praying that human beings, fumbling, broken, inconsistent human beings, would participate in the same kind of unity that exists between the Father and the Son. This is almost too much to process. The Trinity is not just a fact about God's internal nature, it is the destination toward which all of human history is moving. Creation is not trying to achieve something new. Creation is being drawn back into a relationship that pre-existed it. You were made for love because God is love. You were made for relationship because God is relationship. And the entire gospel, from Genesis to Revelation, is the story of God extending that relationship to the people who kept walking away from it. There is a fourth thing the Trinity changes, and it might be the most personal one. It's about identity, about who you actually are, beneath everything that's been said to you, and about you and over you. Genesis 1:27. The verse immediately after, "Let us make man in our image," it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." Image, tselem in Hebrew. The same word used for a physical statue or representation, the kind ancient Near Eastern kings would place in distant provinces to represent their authority, when they couldn't be physically present. The image stands for the original. The image carries the weight of the one it reflects. You were made as God's tselem, God's image, God's representative presence in the world. Now here is the question that changes everything. If God is a Trinity, if God is, at his deepest core, a community of persons who exist in an eternal relationship of love, mutual recognition, and shared identity, then what does it mean that you were made in that image? It means your identity was never meant to come from yourself alone. Think about this carefully. In the ancient Near East, when a king placed an image in a province, the image didn't generate its own authority. It derived its significance entirely from the one it represented. The image was only meaningful in relation to the original. Separate the image from the king, and it becomes just a statue, a piece of stone, heavy but inert. The same logic applies to you. Your identity, in the framework of Genesis 1:27, is relational by design. It is derived, not in a diminishing sense, not in a you're nothing on your own sense, but in the sense that the most fundamental thing about you is not something you generate from within yourself. It is something you receive from the one whose image you carry. This has enormous implications for one of the most widespread forms of suffering in modern life, shame, not guilt. Guilt is about what you did. Shame is about what you are. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. And shame, unlike guilt, cannot be fixed by behavior. You can change your actions. You cannot, by any act of willpower, change the deep conviction that at the core of who you are, something is fundamentally defective. Shame is, at its root, a crisis of image, a conviction that you don't reflect anything worth reflecting, that whatever you were made to represent, you've failed at it so completely that the original no longer wants to claim you. And here is what the Trinity says to that. The Father, Son, and Spirit exist in an eternal relationship of mutual recognition and delight. We know this because of the baptism scene. The Father looks at the Son and says, publicly, over water, in front of witnesses, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased." Beloved, eudokia in Greek, not merely approved, but chosen, delighted in, sought out. The Father looks at the Son and sees someone he actively wants, not someone he tolerates, someone he chooses. And then look at John 17 again. Jesus prays that believers would be included in that same relationship. In us, he says. He is not praying for his followers to have a formal legal status with God. He is praying for them to be drawn into the actual interior life of the Trinity, into the US, into the relationship where mutual recognition and delight already exist from before the foundations of the world. The antidote to shame is not self-acceptance. Self-acceptance asks you to look inward for what you need to feel okay about yourself. But if shame is already living inside, it will corrupt whatever you find there. The antidote to shame is recognition from outside yourself, being seen by someone whose perception you trust, and being found, not merely acceptable, but wanted. That is the Father at the Jordan. That is Jesus in John 17. That is the Spirit in Romans 8, groaning on your behalf with words too deep for you to speak yourself. You carry the image of a God who is love by nature, who is relational by nature, who defines himself not as isolated power, but as an eternal communion of persons who see each other and choose each other over and over, from before time began. Your shame has no purchase on someone who was made to carry that image, not because you earned your way out of it, but because the one whose image you carry keeps claiming you. That is not a metaphor. It is not motivational language. It is the logical consequence of what Genesis 1:27 says about who you are. Read through the lens of a God whose oneness is the richest, most relational oneness in existence. The Trinity is not a doctrine designed to make theology difficult. It is the shape of reality. It is what God actually looks like when you stop trying to flatten him into something simple enough to control. And it is an invitation, not to master the concept, not to win an argument, to be drawn in. We started with a grammatical problem in Genesis 1:1, a plural noun, a singular verb, a choice that the scribes did not make by accident and did not correct for 3,000 years, and we followed it, from Elohim to the us of Genesis 1:26, from the Spirit hovering at creation to the Spirit descending at the Jordan, from God speaking in the first person plural to Jesus saying, I and the Father are one, in a neuter form that means unity of essence, not sameness of person, from Paul's final benediction to John's declaration that God is love and that love requires an eternal community of persons to make sense. The Trinity is not a late invention of church councils trying to split hairs about metaphysics. The Trinity is what you find when you follow the text all the way down, past the English translations, past the Sunday school versions, to the original words that ancient people chose very carefully and never changed. And the most important thing, the thing that should stay with you tonight, is this: that God has always been a God of relationship. The Father, Son, and Spirit have loved each other from before time existed, and you were created as an extension of that love into the world, not a consolation prize, not a science project, an extension of something eternal. If this video changed something for you, even a small thing, I would love to know what. Drop it in the comments. And if you have a friend who's been wrestling with questions about God, about faith, about whether any of this is real, send them this video. Not to persuade them, just to show them that the questions are worth following. There's a video on screen right now about something just as strange and just as important hiding in the original text of the Bible. I think you'll want to see it. We're not done yet.